Hello, y'all, and welcome back to another of the F1 race review slash previews. We've had the weekend off, but we are now talking about the Italian Grand Prix in Monza first off. And as usual, we'll start at the top of the results page and work our way down. And the top of that results page, rather unexpectedly, but also somewhat expectedly, Max Verstappen and Red Bull with the race-winning car. They gambled on that extreme low downforce configuration, and Max managed to do what he needed to do in the corners in the middle sector to put in a fantastic pole position lap, and then drove a wonderful race out front, able to stay ahead of the McLarens. And also, very importantly, we had a kind of an incident early on in the race where Verstappen, in defending from Norris, went off track. Norris was able to keep the car on the track, and as such, Verstappen willingly ceded the position to Norris. And usually, around a track like Monza, a little bit difficult to overtake. The DRS effect is so minimal because of how skinny the rear wings are. But Verstappen was not only able to catch back up to Norris, but was able to overtake him and drive himself to a pretty good finish. Well, pretty good. A pretty dominant is what I'm trying to say. Dominant victory. Was really not under much pressure from Lando for the entire rest of the day. Yuki Tsunoda on the other side of the garage did manage to put the car into Q3, but had to kind of a less than ideal race day and finished just outside the points. He only qualified 10th, so it was going to be close on it anyway. But obviously that super low downforce configuration, Yuki definitely struggled to make good use of it. We're going to go ahead and do, just off tempo, the move that was amazing, Piastri around the outside of Leclerc, just because I was there on track. Kind of replicated around Alonso, obviously lower A. The AI makes it a little bit more forgivable, so quick jump into the McLaren part. Never seen a move around the outside of Lesmo like that. Was absolutely insane from Piastri. Very brave, they almost touched, but we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to McLaren. We'll go back to Red Bull, because usually with Monza, you see upgrades that are circuit specific. It's a lot of front wings and rear wings for the low downforce configuration. Red Bull also brought a pretty substantial upgrade to the floor of the car. Both the underbody geometry as well as the side fences and inlets. So pretty much a whole new floor was brought on that Red Bull. And considering how Verstappen was able to hang on in the middle sector with such skinny wings, and Yuki Tsunoda putting the car in Q3 looked decent, is it something that was a circuit-specific impact, or is this potentially an opportunity for Red Bull to try and make a late charge on the McLaren? It's going to be a lot of effort for Verstappen to get into World Championship position, but he is close enough to Lando where I think he could have the opportunity to make McLaren start to think about having to prioritize one driver over another, or start ceding points to Max. But, for a Red Bull team that was looking very lost in the middle of the year, definitely a welcome sight to see them, looking good in both cars, not just Verstappen kind of dragging it to the peaks. So next up, as we go down the order, we've got the McLaren duo. It was very close performance between the two drivers this weekend, as Lando just edged out Piastri in both the qualifying and the race on overall pace. Lando just kind of had what he needed to keep Oscar at about the right distance. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see throughout the season. Is it's going to be very close between those two drivers. And it's going to come down to who qualifies and gets that pit priority is going to make a big difference in the results of the final few races of the season as we're getting to that last little bit. As I was saying, Lesmo won this corner we're going through now. Oscar, one of the best overtakes all year. And if you watch that replay on the approach to that corner, so out of the De La Rogia chicane, on the way to Lesmo 1, he and Leclerc nearly touched tires. And I don't know how they didn't, but it could have very much been race over for Piastri on lap 1. On one hand, respect to him for making a move like that and going for it and making a stick. On the other hand, it was a big risk that I don't think he needed to take that early on in the race. That being said, Norris was able to put some pressure on Verstappen early, so maybe Oscar's looking at that as I need to get this job done and stay with Lando kind of situation. So who knows what was going through Piastri's mind when he made that attempt at a maneuver, but it was successful and kept him from having to work his way past the Ferrari of Leclerc. Oop, driving off the road a little bit. But a couple big stories for McLaren over the weekend. Number one, they went with a fairly high downforce configuration for Monza, and I think that probably played a factor into why Oscar went for the move when he did, because the Ferrari straight line speed wasn't great, but the McLaren was also pretty slow on the straights compared to like the Red Bull. That's why, Lando was able to get re-overtaken by Verstappen relatively simply once those positions had been swapped. The other controversy, of course, and it always happens when you've got a week off, was the swap of positions after the slow pit stop for Lando. So, here are my thoughts on it. I think if you're sitting in Oscar's car right now, it was the right choice for him to agree to it and make the swap very quickly and without too much fuss. It was only, swapping a second and third place, so a 6-point swing. It now gives Oscar the kind of ammunition to request a similar type of swap when it may be more needed, and maybe for a P1 kind of position and for a bigger swing of points. And just to, the team already seems to be favoring Lando a bit. To not give them any more ammunition to manufacture, to invent situations for Oscar, the better. That was cool. We got that sweet triple warning on one corner. So yeah, when the shoe's on the other foot, Oscar's at least going to be able to point to it, especially as we're getting to the end of the season. If the Red Bull is looking better, if Oscar has that points advantage, it makes it a little easier for them to pull the trigger on such a swap. Now, that being said, from a team perspective, from McLaren's point of view as a team, I think it was a relatively poor choice to make that swap around. They gave Lando pit priority, and as you would do for the car that was ahead, they let him choose his pit stop. The part where I disagree is he was given the option to go second because there was no way they were going to catch Verstappen at that stage of the race. They were essentially allowing Lando to take a gamble, to try and stay out an extra lap, hope for a safety car, and if it comes out, you've got fresh tires, a cheaper pit stop, fresh tires right behind Verstappen, and go for the win. Whereas Oscar, based on his pit timing, no chance at it, was going. He was not under any threat from Leclerc like they like to say. That's not what it was. And so from the perspective of they let Lando take a gamble, and the gamble not only did not pay off, a slow stop caused him to lose the position. I think they should have just let them go race. As far as overall pace, I think Lando had a good opportunity to catch up to Oscar. and get that move done anyway. Personally, I think just Lando had the better pace over the race weekend. So we'll see how it goes. Anything else? Yeah. So it's kind of becoming a more regular thing with McLaren. They seem to love to overthink and create these situations when they don't need to. They need to, at this stage of the season, Lando is relatively safe from Max in the championship. Oscar is also, Max essentially, I think he has to win out and hope for some DNFs from the McLarens in order to be a World Drivers' Championship contender. So he's kind of off the way. I think they just need to treat it like there are two McLarens racing. That's how they need to treat it. Pit strategy, so in that regard, box the lead car first, box the second car the next lap, have at it, and go. So McLaren's frequently trying to complicate things. They've basically got the constructors wrapped up as well, so it's not like they need to try and get the best result. When we talk about Baku later in the video, we'll talk about the permutations. They are in a position to win the constructors this weekend. I forgot to pit. That's fine. But so we'll go to the next team on the list, which is Ferrari. And even in their down years, Ferrari typically shows up to Monza with something spicy and looks to be in contention for the podium and the win. Was not the case this year. Definitely very much off the pace of the lead cars. That being said, they qualified 4th and 5th, Leclerc and Hamilton. Hamilton finally had a pretty decent weekend in comparison to Leclerc. I'll put an asterisk on that though, just because, as you can tell, there's not a lot of corners around Monza. And that's what Lewis has been really struggling with, is the cornering in that Ferrari. So I would guess that it is kind of helping to conceal the weakness maybe a little bit. But it was nice to see him up there. And Ferrari just seemed to kind of lack the straight line speed overall, because we did see when Lewis dropped behind Russell, he was able to stick with him for a number of laps, but was never able to get that move done. Didn't have the straight line speed. That's a huge double lockup on the way into the pits. Didn't have the straight line speed to really get past George. So we will see if the Ferrari, I think Ferraris are kind of locked into that second, that 2B. Because, number one car is definitely the McLarens. The 2A car is the Verstappen Red Bull. 2B is the Ferrari as an entire team looks a little better. So we will see what they look like. It looks worse than it probably is because of how dominant the McLarens are and how good Verstappen's been in that Red Bull. But we got a track that Leclerc coming up that Leclerc's had some good success on. I think it's going to be quite the challenge for Hamilton to stay with the Leclerc around Baku, because Baku's not exactly been a shining light for Lewis in his career. But that's Ferrari. They had a respectable P4, P6, a good result. The only way it gets better is if Lewis is able to get by George. And with the straight line speed of the Ferrari this weekend, I just don't think that was happening. So they mostly maximized their race weekend. There's somebody slow in the next little bit. Antonelli, he's off the circuit. Okay, good. Let's head on next to, because as we talked about it, George, Mercedes. Mercedes put together another pretty strong weekend. I know Toto Wolff has come out with some comments on Antonelli, saying he's not been quite where we want him. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So the real question is that, fuel to keep him motivated? Because they are still, the contract situation is still floating out there for both Mercedes drivers. I think Kimi Antonelli would sign whatever's put in front of him. George Russell, of course, after all the courting of Verstappen that took place, I'm sure is looking for a little more job security, which is Mercedes doesn't typically like to sign the multi-year deals. With Valtteri Bottas pretty much always had a two-year contract, which was 1 year guaranteed, 1 year team option. So he was always kind of fighting for that next contract. And now that they don't have a Lewis to pay quite like that, I'm sure they're probably looking to do the same with George and Antonelli. But contract issues aside, George Russell drove a solid weekend, finishing in P6 or P5, qualifying P6, managing to jump the Ferrari of Lewis Hamilton. Antonelli, a Q3 appearance, so a decent result from him there. Slipped back a bit in the race, but still, a return to the points-paying positions is something that the young driver definitely needed. It was on a bit of a struggle period on his way into the summer break, and coming out of the summer break, Zandvoort, of course, had that crash with Leclerc. So a proper points-paying weekend is probably going to be good for the young driver to regain some confidence and to do decently in front of the home crowd. And though he dropped some positions, he didn't let happen what has been happening a few times this year, where when he drops some positions at the start, he then continues to tumble through. He kind of stabilized and held out. But the Mercedes is still looking to be a fairly decent car in the hands of both drivers. George Russell is making it something that contends with the Ferraris, which is very good on his point. Next up, we've got Williams. And for a team that for many years, even in their down seasons, had looked very slippery in a straight line, this edition of the Williams looked pretty average on qualifying day. There were some really good results in the free practice sessions that made it look like, Williams was turning up with one of their straight line monsters once again. But qualifying day, neither driver making it to Q3 was a bit of a shock. They definitely struggled in that regard. And so they had quite a bit of work to do on Sunday. Now, Alex Albon started P14, halved his position by the end, managed to get that Williams up into the points of P7. Carlos Sainz did improve some positions. He actually qualified ahead of Alex, P13 to Alex's P14, but only made it up to P11. So Alex Albon still seems to have the control of that team, the margin on race day. Sainz is starting to close that gap on the Saturday and has definitely had his share of strategy snafus on Sunday. So the hope is that he'll start to find his way into form, and we might see in the last bit of the season kind of a straight fight between the two Williams drivers, which would be a real good thing to see. But that being said, Williams, for as hot out the gate as they started, they do have a fair bit of work to do to the end of the season to maintain that kind of best of the rest rating. I think they're some 30 point or 20 some odd points ahead of Aston Martin and Vicar. So the gap is definitely closing, but when you're fighting for, 5 points or less most weekends, it does take some time to narrow that gap. So we'll see what Williams can pull in, and of course we'll see as that teammate battle develops, because Carlos Sainz, ended his Ferrari tenure favorably compared to Charles Leclerc. Obviously not quite on his level, but looked decent in the head-to-head. And now is, not quite so on the money when it comes to being compared to Alex Albon. So I think Albon is having his stock raised a fair bit, whereas Sainz may be taking a little bit of a step back as far as the overall rating that he's able to pull. So, like I said, we'll see how it develops towards the end of the season and which driver comes out on top. I believe both drivers are locked in with Williams for the next season, so we'll be able to see that battle continue into the 2026 car, where everybody gets a bit of a reset. Next up, the next team on the list, Sauber. Gabriel Bortoleto, once again, week in and week out, showing his quality. Obviously, Hadjar kind of stole the spotlight in Zandvoort with the podium, but Bortoleto, again this week, started P8, finished P8, a solid result for him in Q3, another points finish, relatively quiet race, and didn't fall back through the field as we often see that Sauber do. And he didn't slide back, even though he was one of the earliest drivers to get on the hard tire and ran it the longest in that final stint. So was able to keep the pace to hold other cars off, even though he was on aging tires. Nico Hülkenberg struggled a bit on Saturday, started P12. Well, he didn't start because on the formation lap had an issue, had to come in and retire the car right away, which is kind of going to be a what-if situation for the Sauber team, because we've seen Hülkenberg quite a few times this season start deep on the grid and work his way into the points. So just being a couple positions out of the points, maybe there's an opportunity for him there to score something, especially if his teammate had pace to stand still in the top 10. Nico might have had the pace to close that gap, so to speak. But Sauber is slowly reeling their way in on the deficit to VCarb ahead and Aston Martin. Of course, it's a little longer reach to get up to where Williams is, but at the rate they're going, they could very well find themselves in P6 in the Constructors at the end of the season, which would be very valuable prize dollars for the Audi team coming in next season. Just a little extra boost to the pocketbook is always nice, especially for a team that was really not expected to score many points at all this year. But the closest to the grid has made for some good point scoring for everyone. Next up, we've got the VCarb team. Obviously, coming off the high of a podium result in Zandvoort, hopes were high, but the next weekend was definitely a struggle. And it seems pretty consistent that VCarb, whenever they seem to have a really big result, the following weekend they're a bit out of sorts, and that definitely was the case this weekend. The drivers, neither one making it out of Q1 in Monza, and they're a team that is not too far away. Their factory is in Italy. But a P16 and a P20 start for Isaac and Liam, respectively. Liam, once again, at P20, not great for him there. Both drivers, though, did find 6 positions, and as a result, Isaac did manage to get into a points-paying spot, which, considering the way that VCarb usually is after a big result, I think they'll take that. That's a decent day for him. All in all, Liam improved a fair number of spots, but was not able to improve all the way into the points on this particular weekend, which is a tough result for the Kiwi. Once I get out of this chicane, I will scroll to the next team, which is the team we are sitting in, the car we're sitting in, the Haas team. A modest Saturday for them. Both cars making it into Q2, starting P15, P11, or qualifying P15 and P11. So not bad for the Haas team, but ultimately did not make up a lot of ground on Sunday. And the Haas team, they came out of the gate pretty strong. Well, they came out of the gate decent, as they often do. But Haas just does not develop much over the course of the year. And really importantly, Oliver Behrman, once again, ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon. And, for a driver that's as experienced as Esteban is, he seems to be struggling a fair bit in comparison to the rookie. He does have a decent points advantage thanks to, getting results over Ollie at the early part of the season when the car was scoring decent amounts of points. But now that they're further back on the grid, the points are much more scarce for them. It's not looking very comparatively good for Esteban when he was a relatively highly rated young driver. He just turned 29, so he's still fairly young as far as drivers go. But the rookie is there, and with the team really not looking to score too many more points at the end of the year, it's kind of looking like they're going to be locked into P9 in the Constructors' Championship. They are kind of just too far back to catch that battle for P6 through 8. Of course, crazy results have happened. It was big last year. Alpine had a huge result with the Gasly podium in Brazil that catapulted them out of the doldrums. So I won't rule anything out, but if things go more, as expected, I think Haas is pretty much locked into P9. And next up, we'll talk about the team that is P10 in the Constructors' Championship, and that is Alpine. Their car's really just not looking very good this year. What is that? Oh, I might be going too fast. I sped. Whatever. Because I looked away to read my notes. But that's all right. We're not caring about the result. But, for a team that's in the absolute doldrums of the points positions, they're continuing to struggle. They did just extend Pierre Gasly on the team, so his contract goes now to 2028. So that's a nice little 3-year extension for him, and that is a massive lockup from Verstappen there. Wow. So we'll see what they can start to develop in 2026. Of course, Alpine is moving to that Mercedes power unit next year. So maybe by not having to focus on power unit development, they can focus just on the chassis and aero. And if the Mercedes power unit is good, then they've got a shot at doing something. But this year, they've got half the points that Haas ahead of them has. And that's a weird sentence. Half Haas has. A lot going on there. But, it would take one of those crazy results, I think, to get them out of P10. And Franco Colapinto still is not looking like very much. I mean, started P18, finished P7, or qualified P18, finished the race P17 with 2 retirements. I mean, they were basically next to last man running in this one. So, not looking great for them to the end of the year. And the only team it's looking rougher for right now is Aston Martin. They got off to that pretty strong hot start. Stroll scoring all those points early on when the car was not talking to Fernando.
Right, Ollie's coming in for his stop.
But they're now, they're getting caught up by VCarb and getting caught up by Sauber. And for a team that has spent quite a bit of money, I'm sure, on luring Adrian Newey to the team to develop the 2026 car, I'm sure they were hoping more to get something to learn from, even though there's quite a big change to the regulation, at least get some wind tunnel correlation, because that even seems to be a struggle for the team at the moment. Lance Stroll, a real rough weekend, did not even make it into Q2. But on the other side of the garage, Fernando Alonso getting that car into Q3 and was looking promising, running P9 inside the points up until, unfortunately, his car retired just ahead of the halfway point in the race. So maybe there was points on offer for the Aston Martin around the Monza circuit last time out, but there definitely wasn't for Lance. And with a retirement from Fernando, they're not going anywhere. And that's just ground that's being given up to, I'm sure a few weeks ago they were probably hoping they would be catching up more with Williams and closing the gap to Williams. Instead, they've been losing that gap and been falling into now a fight for P6, 7, and 8 amongst them, Decarb, and Sauber. So, I think that does it for all the teams. I haven't forgotten anybody this time out. We'll jump over to Baku, and we'll take you around the track there, and we'll talk about this week's race coming up. All right, so hello, y'all. Here we are on the starting grid in pole position for Baku. You can see it's not a very long run down to turn 1. You're on it. I mean, there's right up to the right is the 200-meter braking board. So I'm going to say we're probably a little over 200 meters to the corner. But Baku is a street circuit, a unique one, though, because typically you think of street circuits like Monaco and Singapore, very high downforce, and not a lot of passing opportunity. Baku's a little bit more unique in that it does have some very long straights to it. It has some decent passing opportunity, but it does have those very narrow portions as well. So let's head down to the first corner, and it's all about the initial getaway for drivers. Pole position is on the outside. It's a left-hand corner to start. So getting off the line well and getting to either close the door or getting far enough ahead that you can take that nice sweeping angle and not let the car up the inside. One part you'll have to keep an eye out for early is on the exit of turn 1 here. The way that this wall closes in on you right at this exit curb. So cars trying to go too wide, they've got to make the business decision if they're on the outside. We'll have to see them back out, especially with the way the rules are for being the car on the outside. You then have a pretty short run to another little 90-degree left-hand corner. At the start of the race, you're going to see drivers really kind of trying to filter their way through. And later in the race, it is the setup for the second DRS zone. You can see DRS activation right here. You do get a fairly decent run down a small kink here, but a pretty straight line on your way to turn 3. Hard on the brakes. You'll see a lot of drivers, especially in the practice sessions, go into this runoff area straight ahead. Because if you get a lockup while you're turning in, the cars, you don't want to commit to the turn in because then you're going straight to that Pirelli barrier. So you'll see drivers in practice or even qualifying, turn right, bail out to that runoff area. But it is a pretty tight left-hander. Moves can be made into there, but both drivers have to work pretty well together. Next, you're into the kind of single file portion of this circuit. Relatively short run to this tight right-hander. And you get this kind of switch back section of corners. A couple of times we've seen drivers DNF in this left-hander. They steer in, they hit this, steer in too early and they hit this left wall. We saw it happen in the 2023 Grand Prix a couple of times. Both Nick De Vries and Stroll hit it. De Vries hit it hard enough to break his left front suspension and cause a safety car because there's basically no runoff here. He was able to park kind of straight on. But you've got this awkward little right-hander. Sometimes on this short run, the short little straight, if there's a big enough tire advantage, you may see drivers get an exit, go for a move, but you are then heading down to quite a tight right-hand corner and into the famous castle section. So it's an over 90-degree corner, getting that car rotated and back on the power. and headed to the home of a very famous, memeable spot. In this here is where Leclerc in qualifying locked up, trying to make this left-hander, and went straight on into that wall ahead. And that was where he very famously crashed into the wall, and his radio response was, "I am stupid." In the real track, compared to the game, this left side barrier where this marshal is standing is actually pushed back a fair bit more. So you'll be able to see drivers take a lot more of this left curb when entering this uphill section. It's very narrow up this hill, little switchback right, left around the castle, and then this very awkward right-hander over the hill. Rear end loves to try and snap away from you as you're cresting and the car gets light. And then out of this left-hander, you're on to a really cool flat out section of the track. You get a couple little left-hand kinks here, and then you're very quickly braking for one of the more dangerous corners on the track, this left-hander of turn 15. You can see the way the track falls away to the left here into this left-hander. So you're unloading the front tire, trying to turn in. You will see drivers in practice locking up. Same thing, they'll typically try and bail out to the right. But in the race, you will often see as that car gets light, drivers trying to maximize the track, get to the outside, and maybe make a little brush of this right wall. After that, you've got this little run down a hill where you need to set up for one of the longest flat out sections of the track. This left-hander is the last, it's not the last corner on the track here, but it's the last braking zone. Because then, after you exit, you are flat out the entire way through this set of kinks, and you will see drivers really lean on the tires, these fast switchbacks as you work your way through. You go a decent way down before the DRS opens, but then the DRS is open, and your best overtaking opportunity, obviously, down into turn 1. So let's pick up the pace a bit. That was a relatively safe turn 1. And we'll talk about the strategy and tire compounds. So, Baku, the city circuit here, is one of the tracks that is seeing a change thanks in tire compounds, thanks to the new C6 that has been developed. So last year they ran the softest available compounds, C5, C4, C3. This year they are running the C6, C5, C4 combination. Now last year was the first year that they had done the race in this later slot in the year. Usually, Baku was part of the early set of races, and was usually like the 4th or so race of the season. And so it took place in a much colder time, and we saw a lot of 2-stop races. Last year, we saw a pretty solid 1-stop, and even with that, you know, with the nature of the track, you can't really pass in the middle sector, so it does allow the opportunity for a lot of tire saving in the middle sector to preserve, and you really only push it through the 1st and 3rd sector. However, last year had that fantastic duel between Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc, and it was pretty obvious that they were not saving any tires. And even still, they were able to make the 1-stop work. So now the question really becomes, does the C6, moving everything 1 step softer? I wouldn't expect to see the C6 in play in the race. We see the C5, C4, but essentially moving everything 1 step softer. The question becomes, does it mean that drivers are going to try and go for the 2-stop? Or do they just try and save more and go for the 1-stop? The pit area is on, a pretty fast section of the track. So you lose comparatively more time in the pit lane because other cars are going much faster relative to you. So I think we'll have to see. Oh, and there's a clip of the wall there. There's an I am stupid moment. you kind of have to guess when you turn in, because there's a little bit of understeer when you turn in. You'll hear drivers talk about it, especially at city circuits, and you account for the slide. You turn early and expect the front of the car to slide a little bit before it bites. But when it doesn't slide and it bites right away, then you end up inside in the barriers because, well, you turned too early. To back in Monaco, the fast left-hander after the chicane is a famous one where drivers do that quite a bit. So that's kind of the tire strategy that we will see. As far as what we will expect out of the teams, the question for me, I'm going to start with Red Bull. They've been typically a decent car around here. Honestly, it's a track that in the Red Bull days for Perez, he actually was quite competitive with Verstappen. So I'm thinking Baku might not be Verstappen's best track. Obviously, he had some bad luck in 2021 with the tire puncture, and otherwise it's been pretty smooth sailing. But this was a track that Perez typically looked pretty good on compared to Verstappen. So we'll see. The reason I mention it really, though, is because is that floor upgrade going to play well here? You can't go quite as low downforce around Baku as you could in Monza. You obviously, this middle sector, you really have to worry about the downforce and having the grip. But it is still a relatively low downforce circuit. So we'll see if Red Bull gambles or if they're happy with what the new floor is providing. McLaren has typically looked good around here, even last year before they really had their big resurgence. Or I mean, it was during their surgence, sorry. I'm thinking of 2 years ago. Oscar Piastri looked very good around Baku. Lando Norris looked not quite as good as his teammate. So maybe this is an Oscar track. I don't think the McLarens will be quite as far out in front as they usually are. It is a track where I think the Red Bulls can get involved. Leclerc has typically been quite strong around Baku as well, so I think he's going to have a pretty good showing. Baku's been one of the tracks where he takes pole positions, but the car just absolutely does not have the pace to convert it to a race win. Hamilton, I think this is going to see if his time being close to Leclerc was, finding some confidence in the car, or if it was just because Monza doesn't have a lot of corners. So that's kind of the other thing to look at. Rookies, I think, always struggle around here. It's a tricky circuit. And, obviously not a lot of runoff areas. So if somebody sticks it in a wall, there's a good chance for safety cars. So strategy may be interrupted. However, we've been pretty clean for most races this year. So that is the Baku City Circuit. Any questions or things you'd like me to address? Throw it in the comments, I guess. I've never really said that before, but sure, it's open. Even though most people that are watching this can just text me with their questions, sure, throw it in the comments too if it comes to you while you're watching. But thank you for joining me once again. Look forward to race day. Y'all have a good one. Peace.